I'm trying the new one, so we'll see if I broke it.
You didn't break it. I sees you.
Hello, Linda.
Good afternoon, Matthew. Or is
How you
it still
doing?
morning where you are?
We're going to bring on, I don't know. I can't pay attention to that anymore.
My two boyfriends, bring them on. Because they raised their hand.
Hey, if anybody wants to come on today, go for it. Raise your hand. We'll bring you on.
Man.
Raise your hand if you're sure.
Can we raise the roof?
No, you
Something
do
like
this.
that.
Oh, okay. Not good.
Ah,
You
what a
could not have
wonderful
done that
day.
earlier, Linda.
You can raise the bar.
No, well, you're here, so
not
it's
me.
already happened, Seth.
Oh.
Oh. Wait, let me wipe your nose. It's much better.
Nice. Well, welcome everybody to a wonderful next Thursday. I'm glad, Seth, that you decided to put some clothes on. That was really nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
How is the week treating everybody so far?
Amazing. My week's been amazing.
Cool.
Best lockdown ever.
Greg's at the beach.
It's funny. I'm actually trying to figure out where to go because I just need to get out.
You want to go out? Outside is always good.
Yeah.
There is no better time than to prepay for a cruise.
So we had a cruise that was canceled at the end of April, and now we got a 25% additional credit on top of that because it was
Nice.
canceled. So now we can get a nice upgrade on our next cruise.
Cool. Well, Greg, I know you're pretty familiar with kind of the name of the game, what we do on these things. Seth, I believe you are as well. We've gone through and collected a whole bunch of different questions from a whole bunch of different places, and we like to talk through how to do them and share answers and all of that kind of stuff. Are you ready to play this game of trivia?
Do we have
If I
to
knew they
ring
were
in?
coming- If I knew they were coming,
Yeah.
I would have some really hard questions. If I knew it was Stump Seth, I could have Stump Seth and Greg Day.
Wait, I thought we were talking about do-it-yourself marketing tips and tricks, setting up your company website, live Q&A based on group questions, content creation tips and tricks, using Zoom to go live, and
did
QuickBooks
not write
Online new
that.
feature releases.
We are, but that translates to we're doing what we're actually doing today.
Okay.
It's those automations. We're not as skilled as you, my friend, of how to set up every little aspect of it, right?
I just make it up as I go.
Did you notice he's a little pink today?
Matthew is?
Mhm.
He is, yeah.
He's a little pink.
Is
He
it?
is. He's got a little pep.
Oh, that's really lovely.
He's a little
Are
Pepto.
you doing some red light therapy there?
I am. Well, so always trying to play around with video stuff. And actually, one of the questions we did get this week was people asking, what is it that I'm using in my house for video, I should say. So I've been wanting to play with some
Soap.
RGB lights, dial to be exact, in the bottle, not the bar. I want to be able to play with the colors of an RGB light to see how I can use that to change up the tone and the feel actually of some of the videos and such and mess with the background. What you got, Linda?
Just that you're going to work on color.
Huh?
You don't see
Can't
it.
tell.
I was just going to say.
You can't remember, guys. As far as I can tell, my eyes, I look exactly normal. So
Where are your glasses?
Yeah.
I left them in the car.
Okay.
No, not anywhere. So let me get this part going, and then we won't see my coloring anyways, and it shouldn't really matter. So let's see here.
Looks like Katrina wants a PPP update, so
Oh, it will.
that might be Seth's cue to duck out.
No. So that's good.
Hey, Lillian.
So our first question is about PPP. Just kidding.
PP.
So again, basically going through the different questions, we kind of powerhouse through a whole bunch of these. We got some different details, everything else to tell you about as well. So now, Linda, this was the first one you had set up, right? So it's alert, some QuickBooks payments deposits weren't automatically recorded after you received the funds in your account. record them manually as a bank deposit. So when does this come up and what's going on with this one?
Well, this is one that I see. I've got a couple clients. That one client, she does 2,000 invoices a month, and this happens to her all the time, where something didn't automatically be recorded. I've figured out with my own that if you have a client on a sales receipt and a client paying you on an invoice through QuickBooks Merchant Services, and it happens on the same day, it breaks the system. Then you have to go into deposits and go to sales deposits and then recreate and match the two in the deposit to make it work. I know we can't show that because we don't have a file with merchant services in it, but that's typically the problem. Now, this person's having a problem with when she hits that link to take action, it's supposed to take you to the +sign but bank deposit window, and it's not happening. Now, that could be a cache or cookie issue, or it could be anything really.
What I've found is that when the take action takes you to nowhere, that the action has already kind of resolved itself.
That too, yes. That's true.
Actually good feedback.
The other thing I usually do when these things come up is I go into the settings and go into the actual merchant account, because oftentimes I find, especially because for me, a lot of the times the payments are the same amounts, and I want to make sure I'm 1000% clear on whose payment I'm actually dealing with. So I actually click over into the merchant account and run the search and find the transaction on that side of it to make sure I'm matching up the right thing with the right thing.
And that would be, now we don't have it here exactly, but you'd basically come into this back end setting.
And you go to payments.
You have payments.
It takes you to the merchant window, which is the actual
Yeah,
the
that's I think the only way now that you can actually get into the actual merchant account. So in this case, it says learn more. If you had an account, it would actually, that green button would take you into your merchant account where you can look up and research transactions. It actually works pretty well.
And if you're interested in getting a merchant account, feel free to give me a call. We can help you. Set up an
No,
account,
call me.
I can get you a better rate on that.
I can get you the best rate.
Hashtag
additionally-
affiliate link.
Seth had mentioned that aside from going through that account settings, that there's no other way to get there, but there actually is if you go to merchantcenter.intuit.com.
I thought they killed off the ability to log in directly like that.
No,
Okay, fair enough. I stand corrected.
It is much easier to go through QBO, especially as an accountant. And if we have the access, you can go in and you can get to each of the different clients. You don't have to actually go log in the other way since you're logged into QuickBooks by going through QuickBooks Online. So here's a little bit of notification. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, we just need to make our own QuickBooks Connect.
Yeah. Everybody who was looking forward to going to QuickBooks Connect, tell us that in the comments you were looking forward to going to QuickBooks Connect, and we should put together our own something or other.
We should put a Zoom conference together and call it QuickBooks Disconnect. Sorry, I'll be here.
Probably going to do that. It's probably going to be
Actually
virtual.
pretty good, Seth. That's actually pretty good.
could always
All
do
right.
something in Estero Beach.
Donna Crawley said you can filter the searches in the Merchant Center too, and have
Yeah.
that's also a way to do it. You always have to take it off today, though. It's like, why can't you make the default the month? Why do you have to make it today? But potatoes. Go ahead.
So we did actually have a PPP
All right, Seth.
question. So
Just
sorry,
skip it.
Seth. I'll go fast with it. I'll skip this slide. Oh, dang it. So super fast version. Basically, instead of looking at the exact question, I'm going to go through a super fast version, but anybody's welcome to reach out to me, or I did make a YouTube video on all of this stuff as well. So you can kind of review it there. Actually, Baravi did a phenomenal summary. She summarized all the stuff pretty nicely, where 2 years basically becomes 5 years is what she had said, which is right. You've also got the deferral period. Instead of it being like 6 months to a year, this is an important one because it sounds like it's being pushed out till the point in time which you find out that you've got loan forgiveness, and how that would work from, should restate it as, we ask the lender for forgiveness. The lender asks the SBA. SBA finally gets back to the lender, says, yeah, it's good. At that point, that's when payments would actually get started, which is good because otherwise people would start having to make payments before they got that figured out. So that will be a good change if that gets signed by the president. Last bit of it. Hey, Seth, there's two of you. Forgiveness deadline. So 10 months past the last day of the covered period. So that means we're probably looking something like October of next year. But that could vary based on the covered period. Biggest,
I
biggest.
know what happened. I gave somebody my link so that she could access this webinar.
Oh, that's cool.
Tracy, that's why you have two of me.
Everybody's welcome on. Oh, you know what? My bad. See, Linda, how horrible I am. I should have been doing this whole time.
Can you go back? There was a question though on that.
Absolutely.
There was a little question at the bottom, which I took off of the post. Somebody asked a question on another post about this topic, and it was like a employee count or something question.
Yeah. So I was going to get to that part. Basically, the whole question was, with the change from the 8 weeks to 20 to 31 weeks, does this mean the same FTE doesn't have to be? Does this mean the same FTE doesn't have to be employed until 12/31? I don't know how to answer that. Anything I would say would be an assumption at this point in time, because we need clarification that the June 30th date is actually completely gone. What that has to do with is the extended. So we previously, or currently until this changes, we've had a covered period and an alternate covered period. Covered period was initially from the first date of funding in your account. That was day one of your covered period for 56 days, i.e. 8 weeks. I have noticed that the new language says date of the origination of the covered loan. Now, that to me means that's the date the loan docs are signed. That could theoretically be up to 10 days early. So that's my opinion on that. It's something we need clarification on because they changed the language of that part. So people want to pay attention to that. And then it's basically saying that it's going to be from that date up to 24 weeks or December 31st, whichever one comes first. So now 24 weeks is always going to come first unless you got funded on July 17th, because July 16th, exactly 24 weeks is December 31st. The way that would play out, to give an example, if we had like a funded date of May 4th, I did an assumed loan origination date of April 27th, because again, it can only go back 10 days max. But really, you would just look at your documentation of your loan, if I'm correct on what that means. And if it's correct, that would be April 27th through October 12th, in comparison to what it was before, was like May 4th to June 29th, to make that distinction difference. That becomes important because they didn't make any changes to the idea of how payroll is handled, like the incurred versus paid. We haven't seen any changes to that yet. So that's going to come into play with these changes of timeline, I'm sure, but we're waiting until Friday night for more guidance when they want to ruin our weekend.
Terry Kim wants to know, what is your guess on the 100K 8-week cap versus 2452? Could that be changed?
I'm thinking we all need to combine together and do a class action lawsuit against the government for all of this, for extending PPP in our world until the end of the year. I did calculation. I'm actually going to bring that up in just a moment and I'll show you, but it's one of my biggest questions.
And I got another question. Does
Sure.
Seth David really call the PPP loan poop?
Poop
I
loans.
did. I call them poop loans.
And actually,
Yeah.
there's another question. Joy Harmon Shaw, is the loan term changed to 5 years only for new loans?
So these, I'm going to skip forward real quick here to my top 5 new questions to be considered, thanks to the fact they're doing a horrible job of giving us actual guidance. First one is, in other words, these are things I don't know. Previously, it was 100,000 times 8 divided by 52. Will this now be changed to 24 divided by 52? And so what we're talking about there is, in the bill, it says by the covered period. The 8 weeks divided by 52 was only that because the covered period was 8 weeks. Well, now if the covered period changes to 24, it's a valid question. I don't expect that this would have any impact on people. Like, people aren't going to get more money from this, but it does impact the way you could spend your PPP funds potentially if you have additional employees that are making over $100,000 per year. But I don't know the answer. I am asking, and I was on with some folks with ADP earlier, also asking them. So fingers crossed we'll get some info from somebody somewhere somehow. Another really important one is the FTE exemption base for, so if you offer somebody a job and they decide to turn it down, you get a safe harbor exemption, reduction exemption. The language on that also changed. They're no longer saying in that portion, and I don't know if this is a replacement clause or an addition clause, but it doesn't say anything about employees who were fired now with cause, or if they voluntarily resign, or if they request and reduction in their hours. That really comes into play more like if we're extending this to December 31st, the concern becomes, do we have to keep that same FTE the whole time? How is that going to impact things? What if somebody leaves halfway through and then we can't find somebody that's of equivalent skill set to replace them? Those would be areas we'd be worried about. The last three questions, and then Linda, I'll come back to you because I'm sure there's other questions on this part of it, is why did they change the covered period from being a date of origination? Like what are they defining by that?
Because they're the government, they're out to get you and they don't want you to pay. They don't want to give it to you. They want you to pay back.
And then, so they do make a clause. Number 4 is they make a clause inside of this that says that if you've already received a loan, you can elect to still do the 8-week period that it still says origination date, which would be different than the prior version of this, right? But you can still use the 8 weeks after date of origination, but it doesn't say anything about the June 30th versus December 31st. And everything else says that we're striking June 30th. So we need to know, is that FTE count going to be on June 30th? It's a really, really important question for everybody to like get an answer ASAP on that. And then the very last one is, are the 5-year loans only available to loan recipients who originate the loan on or after? And this has to do with the language that's inside of the bill. There's something at the top when it talks about the loan maturity that makes it sound like it happens only on that date or after. But at the very end of the bill, it also talks about dating as date of enactment as if it was part of the initial CARES Act. And that could be construed to mean as if you were using those initial dates way back then, but I really don't know. So those are my big questions that I would have on that stuff. Any questions, Linda, on that before I kind of squeeze past it? Because you guys can check out the video I've got on YouTube also.
Yeah, the video is good. And Lillian Larson asked if she heard rumblings about the PPP loan under a certain amount, maybe are just being forgiving.
150,000, but it's just like it's people are just talking about it. There's nothing like decided or even close to
nothing
decided
been in
yet.
writing yet. Yeah.
Which I think would be great. And actually, to Seth, if it does happen that way, I fully give you permission to say, I told you so.
I want to know what I said that was a mouthful, though. I just caught that in the comments.
Oh, you read our description of the.
Oh, at the very beginning, right? I can repeat that.
Any other questions on that, Linda?
Nope, that's it. If you get moving, because yes, we will share the link of the PPP video.
Yeah. And everybody, you're welcome to reach out to me if I can help on that side. I just figure we can try to show some other stuff and other things instead of just that the entire time. But reach out if you've got more questions. Okay, so this is another one from our group. Newer group member, basically, they are working with the program Fair Harbor. Now, Fair Harbor is one that we actually at Parkway just started working on thanks to a friend referring over a new client. And basically they're asking bookkeeper, my client uses Fair Harbor. He would like to see his QBO financials on an accrual basis. So I'm trying to figure out best practice to taking the report and entering the information to QBO. This isn't an easy one to show, but I can talk through the process of what it would be. Ultimately, when you have a lot of different applications, if they're not integrating to QBO or to whatever accounting platform, it's always a question of how do I get my data in and how do I get my data out, right? If I'm trying to get it out, if I can get it in a structured format, Excel, so forth, I can always create a special Excel template that will take it, have it, and like reorganize it using like a Excel Power Query and be able to then use a third-party app like SASAnt or my personal favorite, CData, to push the data in. And if you create the template to where it's just kind of a copy and paste in every time you need to run that report, you can really streamline down the entire process. Once for this specific one, I did reach out to the person. I'm still building this out, so I can't show it quite yet, but we'll share some notes on it. Seth, you're pretty big about doing stuff like this where you make templates and do what you got to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any top tips on how to be most successful with it?
Usually you just want to start with, looking at what needs to be mapped, right? If you're doing an import, then I always just I was just doing an example of this in our Bulletproof Bookkeeping webinar this week because we're actually using SASANT and showing how to import items, actually service items into QBO. So I do two things. So if I know I'm importing items into QBO, service items, I actually go into the screen in QBO where I would go if I were manually creating that item. And I use that as my kind of guide for how to create the screen, the columns I need, because I have to look through that. So yeah, products and services, and just go to create a new service item, for example. And actually do non-inventory. I take it back. Go back and do non-inventory, because that was the example we were actually doing. So over here, this layout gives me all the things I need to make sure I'm mapping, or I need to decide from among these what I need to map. So each thing becomes a column. I need a column for the name. If I care about the SKU, need a column for that. If I want a category, need a column for that, and on down the line. Obviously, I need an income account. If I want this two-sided, I need to check off that I purchased this product from a vendor, and then there's going to be an expense account to map. Then what we ended up doing was then when I first went to import the file using SASANT, and what I did was I always started off with just 2 or 3 line items in the import file just to test it and make sure it's going to go through, so that if it broke, I don't have to wait 20 minutes for it to finish importing the whole file before it tells me where the errors were. So I do like 2 or 3 lines just to see what doesn't work. So it turns out, you see how it says non-inventory at the top there for the type? And the way the name is formatted, it says non with a capital N dash inventory with a lowercase I. Well, that part failed, the import. So then I looked into SASANT, and in SASANT, they do a really good job of giving you a preview. For whatever reason, for SASANT to understand or accept the import, the type has to be described as non with no dash or space, and inventory, where the N in non and the I in inventory are both capitalized. If I remember correctly, that's what it had to look like in order for it to take the type. So you always want to test it out with just 2 or 3 lines in the file to see what's going to crash. So you could fix that without having to wait the whole time for the whole file to import. And you might have to do 4 or 5 iterations before you get it right, then do the whole rest of the file, because that should work. And that's going to save you time doing all this.
That's a really, really smart tip. It's so much easier to go in, create something like you just said, then pull it with the program that you're actually going to use, because you can see exactly the structure you need, and you can relate, oh, this goes here, this goes there. And then all it is from at that point is, if you're using, like, this is CData, same concept, it's Excel. You just put everything else in where you need it to match up and line up, and you can then start to do the import process. And I made that sound super simple. Once you've done it some time, it is easier, but that's the concept to it itself.
Yeah, and the bigger picture point is to expect it to fail, right? It's
Absolutely.
going to fail the first 2 or 3 or even 5 times, and that's what we went through the other day, and it did. It failed a bunch of times. Each time it failed, we fixed that one little piece that needed to be fixed. And but then eventually, once we got it right on just 2 or 3 lines, now I could take I can take an 800 line file, and rest assured it's going to go through the first time around, now that I've tested it out. And if you're and when you are testing it out and you're just doing 2, 3, 4, or 5 lines, you almost want a different row to test a different thing that you're trying to test that could go wrong. In other words, you want different sort of iterations of things that might break, and try and think about that when you're laying out that test data that you're importing.
Yeah, there's the last little bit would be there is a certain order things need to go in, that if you're trying to rebuild, you want to keep in mind, like, if you have an invoice, obviously you can't put invoices in if you don't have your customers in there, your items in there, your terms in there, all of those kind of things have to be in the system already for it to reference against. So there's a certain structure to it. And feel free to reach out, either Seth, I'm sure, or myself, and we can tell you a little bit more about it here and there as well.
Oh, Katrina said, be careful with the import from a reservation system, as more info than you want could be synced into the GL platform. And Donna Crawley said, I do a test true up with a small sample set of the same data first test trial.
Always.
Also,
Yes.
Backup.
Backup, yeah. Get a backup if you have to. It's a QBO.
What we'll usually do, so I like to pull for that one specific program, Fair Harbor, which I keep calling Safe Harbor right now, but Fair Harbor, I will export everything I possibly can, like load up the biggest CSV I possibly can, and then I pull it into doing an Excel Power Query, so I can then map out what columns I actually need. For example, I tried to set this up so I could show everybody. Let's see here. What I'm talking about is like when I was doing it, it looks just like this. So these are all the columns I was able to get information from that program. Then I start to go through and I'll maybe put on yes, no's if I to figure out do I need it or not. And then when I filter down to just the yeses, what I will do is maybe put them in order. So if I want this to be 1, but then this is going to be 2, and then this is 4, like if you have to reorder the stuff, it's a quick, easy way to like visually look at it. Then you can map it. And then if you took that same data into Power Query, you can basically change and move things around like crazy. We could do a demonstration on that at a different time, but Power Query is like from your data, you come up here, go from table range, and it will manipulate all the data. So,
And if you want to see something like that, just leave the comments in Facebook or whatever, or reach out so we can.
actually, it's a great submission in the form. If we know that people are interested in that, I would be more than happy to have data ready to go and show it, of course. Oh, this is a good one.
By the way, let me throw one more thing in there in case it wasn't apparent. So when you go through all your iterations and finish testing the template, and you very likely will end up having to make different tweaks. Like I was trying to import items with sub items doing parent colons child, and that didn't work. In fact, QBO apparently, or Sassant is probably who's more to blame for this, I think. Is when you try to import, originally QBO didn't allow sub items. You just had category and item, but now you can do sub items, but I don't think Sassant is able to handle that yet. So I had to set up the parent as a category and the sub item as the actual item name. Anyway, by the time I was done with the process, I had tweaked the spreadsheet that I was using. So once I know I've gotten that nailed down and I've got a successful import done, then I'm going to file save as, and that's how I create the template that I'm now going to use every time I'm doing the same kind of import ever again in the future. And I keep a library of these kind of templates. So if I'm doing an item import, here's the template. If I'm doing a sales receipt, here's the template, and so on and so forth.
So you go file, save as, and then the type is the key thing here.
Yeah, you can actually, I don't bother with the template type, but it's a smart thing to do. But
the beauty of doing this is when you do this, like I'm going to come over, instead of saving this, I'm going to go new. When I go new, these are different templates I've made. Otherwise, also in like these personal ones, I can pull this up, click on it, whichever one, who cares? And it's going to basically create a new iteration that I don't mess up my template at all. So when I get it perfected, I go back, save it with it cleaned out, so I don't have to empty the stuff out. And now see how it does. It'll give you like a v2.1 or it adds on, and you get a good starting point every single time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love Excel. Can you do that with Google Sheets?
Mm-hmm.
Dang it. Okay.
Tell them.
Okay, so how about this next one? Does anyone know why some credit cards won't process through QB payments? My client has to keep their old service since some cards don't work.
Because they expired.
Well, I mean, I'd like to assume that if we're talking apples for apples, we're not like if the card will work on the other service, it shouldn't be expired or anything like that, or fraud or any of those kind of things, right?
But maybe it's didn't they stop using PayPal? So maybe it's a PayPal. No, that wouldn't be a credit card though. I don't know. I have no clue why it wouldn't process.
Yeah, it'd be hard to know without actually being able to look at a situation where a card's not going through. And
yeah, that would be a great point to reach out to merchant processing and ask them.
Yep.
Yeah.
We would need more information, in other words, to be able to answer the question properly.
Is anyone else having trouble today with the online payment feature in QBO? My client is getting an error message. You can try again or come back later and try connecting then. Software development, bugs happen.
Yeah, I remember that error coming up, and it seemed like it was global. A couple months ago, one of my clients was having that issue, and he was desperately trying to get a very big payment in. And anyway, yeah, usually you just have to wait that out.
So that's actually one other thing, now that you say it that way. One thing that does happen is if you've just set up with merchant processing with Intuit, they have certain daily limits and monthly limits, as to where if all of a sudden you go to run this huge transaction that's abnormal, right? So normally you're doing $200, $300, and all of a sudden you try to run 7,000 or 10,000, that absolutely can hold on. That can actually not go through and it's basically it's part of the fraud protection trying to stop it. So that could be part of it. Could
I
definitely
would
be.
hope they give a better error message than that though, because that's kind of generic. But
It's frustrating when it happens. We've had it happen to our clients before, and
I
it
have
could,
to,
yeah.
because they
All
call
right,
you.
this one. Any other questions, group wise? Anything else we should be answering? Make sure we got
I
everybody.
don't see anymore, no.
Okay, cool. So I've been working on a client's books that were several years behind. Yay. Oh, I have updated most of the information to current, but still have some issue with the undeposited funds account. There are several entries from 2010 and 2014 that need to be dealt with, and I can't find where they were deposited in a bank. So bank account, and the bank accounts have been reconciled through April 2020. So who wants to suggest what this would be? Most
I'll
likely.
go. I'll go. So,
Seth,
all right.
go for it.
First of all, it sounds like it's very possible those payments were recorded as being received in QuickBooks, but never actually made it into the bank, right?
Yep.
And so it could be that they actually never got paid, or it could be that the payments were received in cash. I've seen that happen. The owner's like, well, I got cash. I needed to mark it received, but it didn't get deposited into a bank account. But the bottom line is, for something that's that old, if it's still sitting in undeposited funds, I would check for two things. A, it could have been duplicated, right? Because we could have received the payment on the invoice, and then when the actual deposit came in, we might have recorded that amount and booked it straight to an income account. That's the most common reason for this kind of thing. But from the description in the question, it sounds like they've checked that, because they said they can't find the deposit amount anywhere. But that's always the first thing I check for. Bottom line, when it's that old, and I know the big bank accounts are reconciled, and I know the tax returns are filed, let's say, then what I will usually do is I will check those amounts off in the undeposited funds, whatever the total is. I will record the deposit on January 1st of this year, and I will add a line item at the bottom section of the deposit to zero out that deposit. And here's the kicker. So Matthew's kind of showing the example. So let's say we've got that total. So in this line, well, I'll come back to the account. Let's just, for the amount, do negative 4,031 with 25 cents. We want to zero out this deposit. And here's what I started doing a couple of years ago, because I used to struggle with this myself. Like, where should I stick this? And because a lot of people want to stick something like this in retained earnings because it's from a prior period, right? So no, what I do here now, because I'm assuming there's no point in even asking the accountant, right? Because at this point, we're making the decision. It's too old to bother researching. It's not worth it. It's de minimis. It's immaterial, whatever you want to call it. So what I've begun to do here, so that it will properly close out from this year's P&L and get into retained earnings the right way, is I create an account here called Prior Period Adjustments. So the name is very literal. And then I classify this account. When you create it, Matthew, we'll call it other expense. So it falls to the bottom of the P&L outside of the operating profits of the company. So it doesn't impact my profits, my operating profits from the current year. And it very literally says what it is. And that should raise a question in the eyes of the person who's doing the returns when they get this year's books, because they'll see that line item on the P&L. And I want to invite them to ask me about it so I can say, well, here's what the deal was. You tell me how you want to handle it for tax purposes, but it's not worth it to me to go back that many years and try and figure out where the money went, because either it may be that the money never went anywhere, that we just never actually got paid and somebody made a mistake, recorded payments and never reconciled or resolved it. And I always do it on January 1st, because January 1st in the United States is a good day for adjustments like this, because most businesses aren't operating on that day.
Nothing happens.
And so, well, on top of that as well, that's based off a premise that if the fiscal year is usually ending December 31st.
Well, yeah, of course.
Just as one part of it. So if your business was on a different cycle, you would want to do it basically right within the new year, because the intention is to be able to have the book to tax that's still there and then deal with it only in the current period, of course.
Mhm.
And that would be that.
That's my answer.
Well, thanks for sharing that one, Seth. Anybody else want to add anything else to it? I don't.
I think that answer was worth at least 2 cents.
Sometimes though, when you go looking into a deposit,
Ooh, mhm.
Somebody, they usually do book it to the products and services or wherever they're sale. You don't have to go back.
I was going to show.
But
I'm going to show a trick, but go ahead.
But you could open it up and then just attach the payments, if it's not prior year. But I've seen it where
Yes.
they're like, I had that deposit. I know I deposited, and you look and they just booked it in through the bank feed. Then you can attach the payments and remove the line item to the.
Yeah, if you find the deposit in there, you can just swap them out. But bear in mind, if it's a closed year and the return's been filed, then you can't
Right,
do
you don't
that
want to.
because,
Correct.
although actually technically, if they're a cash basis tax filer, you can still do it because it won't impact anything.
Mhm.
So the one thing I was going to show is like this, that by the way, again, this is a fake company file. So the reason this looks like a mess is because it's a fake company file. We push stuff into it all the time. If you're going through and you have a whole bunch of deposits and you have to try to match up like the different check payments,
Mhm.
you can actually come into this window, Control F on your web browser. And if you've been good about putting check numbers in, like 366, start typing in, it will take you straight to that check, which is great. So then you can very easily click it off, boom, good to go, right? Change your date, everything else. So that's a super time-saving tip. And then the other part with the trade out, like you were talking about, Linda, we always, Parkway, what we'll do is we actually take any revenues that for companies, we'll put it to revenue query at the beginning of each, throughout the month. And then we go back and do the deposit detail. By doing that, we can basically set up this one report. I'm going to go all dates because this is a mess, like I said.
Mhm.
And we would look in, and when I'm seeing deposit like this, here it has a customer name. I know that that's now been cleaned up and linked to something, but this one hasn't. And I probably don't have an exact match, but I would come in, be like, okay, 681675, fine. I look at the bank and I find out that it's this one and something else, right? And you would make sure it's the right amount, of course. And then this would be able to get removed at the
Mhm.
bottom.
Also, you can see that there's 2 pages on the deposit screen, and sometimes people don't realize there might be pages. I had a guy one time at 50 pages of that. He had obviously imported some, and he's like, I didn't know there was that many pages, and they were just old undeposited funds just sitting there from prior periods. It was a fun job.
Yeah. So if we pretend that this amount here actually was that same 637,198, by doing what we're doing here, this revenue query is a placeholder, even if it was reconciled. I would actually be able to then delete this line as long as it's the exact same amount, and that's how you can go through and replace. But we're talking about in the current year, not prior
All right,
periods,
yeah,
of course.
right.
So
Unless, like Seth said, if they're cash basis.
I had a question
Awesome.
about something that Seth had said about the if you had the undeposited funds and you were on a cash basis, that it wouldn't include it.
No, what I'm saying is you could still
thought
do
it
the
did.
swap in a prior year if they're a cash basis filer because it won't change what was filed. In other words, if I have an invoice where I receive payment, actually, I take that back. Well, here's what would happen. If I had an invoice where I had received the payment, that income's showing up on a cash basis because the invoice was marked as received, right? And then if I also recorded the deposit straight to income because I left that payment sitting in undeposited funds, then on a cash basis, I will have duplicated that income.
Right.
Right.
And so that's
so I may have misspoken. So,
yeah.
You need to have
Because-
the
so you can't do the swap in that case because, in other words, if the payment was never received and you just had an open invoice and the deposit, you could do this. You could fix that if you needed to. But yeah, the other way, you have duplicated income on a cash basis, so you can't do the swap in that prior year because then you'll be reducing the income down to what it should have been, but now your books won't agree to the tax return anymore.
which is something we see all the time when we see somebody and then you do have to make the adjustment if it's been booked in the bank feed and then also booked as a payment. Now you've got double incomes.
That's why Seth is saying put it into this prior period adjustment account so we make sure it comes up on the tax return, because if it's $1,000, the accountant might just say, let's bury it or whatever. But if it's, I've had a case where it was over $100,000 where they had increased the income. They reported $100,000 too much income in the course of a year, and that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know any better because they had trusted their old bookkeeper and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and the main point is to not hit the equity section with an adjustment like that, because now you're screwing up the tax accountant's reconciliation of retained earnings on the tax return if you do that. That's specifically because I used to do it that way, and even though I never hit retained earnings with it, I would hit another equity account, and I realized that I'm still screwing them up. So that's why I decided to put it on the P&L at the very bottom, and that way, like I said before, this way it shows up, it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's hard to miss. In fact, I'd almost say if I turn over those books to the CPA or enrolled agent who's doing the returns and they don't ask me about it, then I question how carefully they're looking at that P&L.
If they're really looking, yeah.
Well, so real quickly, I want to show this really ugly, scary spreadsheet for one primary reason.
Why am I only getting $880, man?
Yeah,
I'm like the
he's
lowest
trying-
paid. What the?
I got a raise. I don't know. I'm good. I
Bullshit.
used to only get $10, so I'm happy.
Actually, you used to always have to pay more money back, but yeah.
You know what? I'm going to stay at home and collect unemployment. I'm out.
Nice. Well, ironically, so the reason for showing that is the upcoming week, as we get close to our time here, always trying to be respectful of everybody's time. Next week, we've got a couple different webinars coming up. Linda and I will be doing Surviving Your Next Workers' Comp Audit.
That sounds
It's-
exciting.
Isn't that
You
sound
know
fun?
what? It actually, we went through.
I'm
and we're
making my
gonna go-
daughter watch it.
Exactly. We're going to demonstrate what information you actually need to get through an audit. And I've gone through and actually recorded the process for a couple different online audit submissions. So we can talk about what's necessary, what's information you need, take away the fear from having to deal with the workers' comp audit as much as possible. Why do you need certificates of insurance and all that kind of stuff? And then that one's going to be on the 9th at 9 a.m. Now, Linda, you've also got with Lien Law, you're doing something on the 10th as well, right?
Yeah, it's the monthly accounting pros, Lien Law Accounting Pros meeting, and we're just going to get into talking about mid-market. It's going to be Sarah and I, and we're going to talk about mid-market and how we been working with mid-market clients, and how it's been a pretty sweet way to work with attorneys, and we get to do all the fun stuff with the reports and things. It'll be good. John's got a lot of questions for us, and we're going to be answering a lot of the questions on how do you get them and what do you do to get them.
Cool. So we will be sure to go back, put links for both of those in that everybody can access that as well. Were there any other last questions at this time?
Nope, I don't think so. Donna Crawley did share a document that I'll put in there, and it's how the items can go into it as an import. So I'll share that Word doc
Nice.
in there as well. Share the link to the webinars if anybody's interested. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Then the last thing, Seth, what do you got anything going on next week? Normal 97 and up, which if you guys are not familiar and you haven't checked out yet, strongly recommend you checking out the group. I don't think I could have survived all of this COVID without it. Really, it's been great to have such a good group of friends that we can bounce the ideas off of each other, help each other out. I continue to learn from it every day. So thanks, Greg. That's all you, buddy.
Thank you. And Tracy's here with us. She's one of our
Tracy.
newest members.
Yep.
Are you enjoying the group so far? Would you say?
I love it. Yeah, Seth's great and helping me out a lot and getting me going with the real estate accounting.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
That's perfect. He's perfect one.
He
Well,
is.
thank you
Yeah.
for joining us again today as well. Appreciate that. And thank you everybody
Thank
else
you.
who joined. On that note, I will wish everybody a very successful week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Matthew and Linda.
Thank
This
you.
is great.
Bye, guys.